Most people think they are climbing a ladder. They believe that if they can just reach for one more rung, landing that promotion, hitting the six-figure salary, or finally tucking away that safe 10% in a retirement account, they will eventually reach the top and finally be able to breathe. But here is the breakthrough. You aren't on a ladder. You are on a treadmill. And the person who owns that treadmill is the one actually getting somewhere. To understand why your hard work hasn't translated into true wealth, you have to recognize that there are two separate realities existing simultaneously on this planet. They use the same currency, and they look remarkably similar from the outside, but they operate on entirely different laws of physics. In the first reality, the one most of us were indoctrinated into through the school system and the responsible financial industry, wealth is seen purely as a function of labor. This is the labor trap. In this world, you trade a finite resource, your time, for a flat rate. Even if you are a high earner, like a doctor, a lawyer, or a senior executive, you are still trapped. Why? Because the moment you stop moving, the money stops flowing. Think of it like the Mercedes flower pot. Imagine you buy a $150,000 car, but instead of driving it, you fill the interior with dirt and plant a palm tree in the driver's seat. It might be the most expensive flower pot in the world, and it certainly looks impressive to the neighbors, but it is fundamentally worthless because it isn't fulfilling its purpose, movement. Most people's careers are Mercedes flower pots. They look prestigious and they pay well, but they don't move you toward freedom. They keep you stationary, rooted in a rigged system where inflation and taxes are designed to prune your growth the moment you start getting ahead. In this reality, you are a saver, and as the world has shown us, the system is designed to make savers lose. But then there is the second reality. This is the world of the elite, and it operates on the principle of ownership over labor. Here, wealth is not something you do, it's something you own. The wealthy don't optimize for a better salary. They optimize for what is known as debar. In Hebrew, this word means both word and thing. In this second reality, you understand that your words and your ideas can be codified into things, businesses, intellectual property, real estate, or automated systems that exist independently of your physical presence. While the saver is trying to build a sandcastle while the tide is coming in, the owner is building a dam. To see how this plays out, imagine two people, Sarah and Mark. Sarah follows the traditional rules. She works 60 hours a week, earns $200,000 a year, and saves $20,000 of it. She feels rich, but she is actually one medical emergency or one corporate layoff away from a total collapse. Her wealth is linear. Mark, on the other hand, understands the clarity of ownership. He earns much less, maybe $70,000, but he spends his nights building an automated digital asset. He doesn't save his pennies. He uses leverage, perhaps taking a low-interest loan to acquire a small cash-flowing property. 10 years later, Sarah is exhausted, still chasing a top that doesn't actually exist. Meanwhile, Mark has reached orbit. He doesn't have to work because his assets have geometric momentum. He didn't work harder than Sarah. He just played a different game. The moment you recognize these two realities, the fog evaporates. You realize that working harder at your job is like running faster on that treadmill. It only makes you more tired. This clarity changes everything about what you do next because it shifts your daily objective. Instead of asking how to get a raise, you start asking how to acquire or create a thing that generates value without your physical labor. You stop looking at debt as a burden and start seeing it as the fuel for your leverage. You stop looking at your salary as the prize and start seeing it as the seed capital for your exit strategy. But here is the problem. Even when people finally see the door to this new reality, they stay frozen. They see the exit, but they don't move. They feel a heavy, crushing weight that keeps them pinned to the familiar struggle. What is that invisible force that keeps smart people trapped on the treadmill even after they see the owner playing a better game? The answer isn't in your bank account. It's in the physics of your mind. To break free, you need to understand the shaking that happens right before you hit escape velocity. To understand why most people never make the leap from the labor trap to the ownership realm, you have to stop looking at success as a personality trait and start looking at it as a problem of physics. Most people view their struggle as a sign of failure. They think that if it feels hard, they must be doing something wrong. But here is the clarity breakthrough. In the world of momentum, the greatest struggle occurs at the moment of the greatest progress. If your life feels like it is vibrating apart right now, you aren't failing. You are likely hitting the atmospheric resistance required for a breakthrough. We are conditioned to believe in the easy start. We think that if we find the right business, the right investment, or the right side hustle, it should feel like a smooth, uphill glide. This is the fog of inertia. In reality, the laws of physics state that an object at rest stays at rest. Breaking that rest is a violent act. Think about a rocket ship sitting on the launch pad. It is a massive, heavy hunk of metal pinned down by the relentless gravity of the standard way of living. To move that rocket just 1 inch off the ground requires more energy than it takes to travel thousands of miles through space later on. In fact, 90% of a rocket's fuel is consumed during the first few minutes of flight. It isn't used to reach the destination. It's used simply to escape the pull of where it started. When you start moving toward ownership, when you start that business, or dedicate your nights to creating intellectual property, something happens that the gurus never tell you about. It's called the shaking. As a rocket approaches escape velocity, the air resistance becomes so intense that the entire craft begins to vibrate and gyrate violently. To the untrained eye, it looks like the rocket is about to explode. This is exactly what it feels like when you try to change your life. You experience a psychological shaking where your old friends start questioning you and your family tells you to be realistic. You experience a financial shaking where you're pouring your remaining energy into an asset that hasn't paid you a dime yet. You are exhausted, your bank account is lower than usual, and you're working twice as hard as your comfortable peers. In the old reality, this shaking is interpreted as a sign to stop. But in the physics of clarity, this shaking is the proof of progress. It means you are nearing the speed required to break the gravity of poverty. If we look closer at this through the lens of narrative depth, we can compare the airplane to the satellite. An airplane never leaves the atmosphere. It stays within the labor trap of air resistance, burning fuel every single second just to stay in the air. If the engines stop, the plane falls. This is the salary life. You have to burn your time every day just to stay at 30,000 feet. But a satellite is in orbit. Because it achieved escape velocity, because it pushed through that 90% fuel burn and that violent shaking, it is now moving at 17,000 miles per hour with zero fuel consumption. It is in a state of success, momentum. It is automatic. Most people spend their entire lives burning 10% of their fuel over and over again, never hitting the threshold required to break out. They try a little bit, get scared by the shaking, and let gravity pull them back to the launch pad. They spend 100% of their fuel over a lifetime, but never actually leave the ground. Clarity changes what comes next because it gives you permission to be exhausted with a purpose. When you understand escape velocity, you stop trying to conserve fuel. You realize that you cannot tiptoe into wealth. You have to commit to the burn. You realize that the intense difficulty of your current transition isn't a reason to quit. It's the signal that the atmosphere is thinning. Once you reach orbit, the rules of the game change. Business becomes easy. Investing becomes automatic. But you will never reach that state if you are still using your eyes to judge your progress. In the shaking phase, your eyes will tell you that you're failing. To reach the stars, you have to stop trusting what you see and start trusting how you hear. But how do you actually stay in the cockpit when the shaking becomes unbearable? How do you maintain the now faith required to keep the engines firing when everyone else is telling you to abort the mission? The secret isn't in your willpower. It's in how you've programmed your ears to believe to see. If the first two sections were about the what and the how, this section is about the who. Who do you have to become to sustain a launch that everyone else thinks is a disaster? To move from the labor trap to the ownership realm, you have to undergo a mental pivot. You have to move from a visual reality to an auditory one. Most people operate under the mantra, "I'll believe it when I see it." This sounds practical and grounded, but in the world of wealth creation, it is a death sentence. Most of the things you desire to accomplish, generational wealth, total time freedom, or a business that runs without you, are things you have never accomplished before. If you haven't seen them yet, and your belief is tied strictly to your sight, then by definition, you cannot believe in your future. This creates a loop. You look at your current bank balance, which creates a feeling of lack. That doubt leads to hesitation, which results in the same bank balance next month. The breakthrough is realizing that doubt is created in the eyes, but faith is created in the ears. In the ownership realm, we flip the script. We don't wait for the harvest to believe in the seed. We believe in order to see. Think of that word debar again, the word that becomes a thing. Your ears are the gateway to your internal reality. Faith comes by hearing. It doesn't say faith comes by seeing a spreadsheet or a proof of concept. When you are in that shaking phase of your launch, when the rocket is vibrating and you're exhausted, your eyes are going to scream at you to stop. They see the lack of sleep, the unread emails, and the critics. If you live by your eyes, you will abort the mission. But the owner tunes out the eyes and listens to the word. They listen to the expectation. They enter a state of now faith, where they stand on a foundation of what is going to be, rather than what currently is. Consider the story of David and Goliath. Everyone in the army was looking at the giant with their eyes. Their eyes told them he was bigger, therefore he wins. Seeing was believing, and what they saw was death. But David didn't look at the giant. He heard the giant. He heard Goliath cursing the covenant, the agreement David had with a higher power. David remembered what he had heard in his upbringing, that he was more than a conqueror. David's faith wasn't just a motivational feeling, it was a foundational substance. He stood on the invisible reality that the giant was already defeated because the giant had broken the rules of a higher game. What if your Goliath is your debt, your lack of experience, your fear of failure? If you look at those things, they will grow. If you listen to the purpose you were created for, they will shrink. So, how do you practically pivot? You have to stop lying to yourself about how bad things are and start lying about how great they are going to be. Since any future outcome is technically made up because it hasn't happened yet, most people choose to make up a horror story. They imagine the business failing in vivid detail. They can smell the bankruptcy and hear the "I told you so's." To reach success momentum, you must build an 8K Technicolor mental cinema of your desired outcome. Don't just think, "I want to be rich." Hear the sound of your phone notifications when the assets sell. Don't just think, "I want to be free." Feel the texture of the sand on the beach where you'll be sitting while your business runs in orbit. Clarity changes what comes next because it removes the angst. When you move from seeing is believing to believing to see, you stop being attached to the immediate result. You become like a farmer who has planted a seed. He doesn't go out every morning, dig up the seed, and cry because there's no tree yet. He knows the physics of the seed are working underground in the invisible. He is calm. He is certain. When you have this clarity, you stop trying to succeed and you start occupying the space of success. You talk differently. You negotiate differently. You don't use high-pressure sales because you don't need another person's yes to validate your word. You know the harvest is coming because you trust the law of the seed. This mental pivot is what allows you to handle the final hurdle, the transition from being a high-value worker to becoming a strategic leverager. But even with a clear mind, how do you handle the practical side of the rigged game? How do you actually use the tools of the elite, like debt and other people's money, without falling back into the traps of the middle class? The answer lies in understanding that while the poor save pennies, the elite leverage empires. To move from a mental pivot to a physical fortune, you have to change your relationship with the mechanics of money itself. If you have reached this stage, you've accepted that the system is rigged, and you've committed to the shaking of the launch. Now you need the clarity to handle the controls. Most people believe that the opposite of poverty is saving. They think the way to win the game is to be the most disciplined squirrel in the forest, hoarding every nut, cutting every expense, and hiding from the danger of debt. But here is the clarity breakthrough. In the ownership realm, saving is a slow-motion trap. The elite do not save their way to the top. They leverage their way there. In the labor trap of reality A, you are taught that debt is a burden and saving is safety. You are told to put your money in a savings account earning 2% while inflation runs at 5%. You don't need a calculator to see that this is a guaranteed way to lose purchasing power every year. You are essentially trying to swim against a current that is moving faster than you are. This safety is a fog. It keeps you focused on small linear optimizations, like skipping your daily coffee, while the elite are playing a game of geometric expansion. In the ownership realm, we don't look at money as a reward for hard work. We look at it as a tool for leverage. Leverage is simply the ability to do more with less. Think of a literal lever and fulcrum. If you try to lift a 1,000-pound boulder with your bare hands, you will fail, no matter how hard you try. But if you use a 10-foot pole and a sturdy rock, you can lift that boulder with one hand. In finance, the 10-foot pole is OPM, other people's money, and the rock is the tax code. The difference between a saver and a leverager is the difference between addition and multiplication. The saver is linear. You save $1,000 a month, and in 10 months, you have $10,000. It is a slow, predictable, 1-to-1 ratio. This is the safe path that leaves you exhausted and behind the curve of inflation. The leverager, however, is geometric. You take that same $10,000 and use it as a down payment to control a $100,000 asset, like real estate. If that asset appreciates by just 5%, you haven't made $500, which is what the saver would make. You've made $5,000. You've achieved a 50% return on your actual cash because you used the bank's money to amplify your results. This is why the wealth gap grows. The elite are using debt as a tool to acquire assets that pay for the debt. They aren't spending money. They are positioning it. Imagine a village where there is a drought. The savers take their buckets and walk 3 miles to the river every morning. They work hard, they are responsible, and they bring back just enough water to survive. If they get sick, they stop eating. This is the life of labor. The leverager, meanwhile, spends their time building a water wheel and a pipeline. It's harder at first and requires borrowing tools from the neighbors, but once the pipeline is finished, the water flows to the village while the leverager is sleeping. They don't have to carry buckets anymore. In fact, they can now lease the water to the bucket carriers. The carrier thinks the builder is lucky, but the reality is that the builder simply understood the physics of flow. Clarity changes what comes next because it removes the fear of being in the red. When you understand leverage, you stop being afraid of strategic debt. You realize that good debt is actually a heat-seeking missile for wealth. You stop asking what something costs and start asking what it controls. This shift changes your daily actions. You stop hoarding and start positioning, moving your capital out of stagnant savings and into productive assets. You seek out other people's money because you realize your growth is no longer limited by your own bank account, but by your ability to find good deals. You optimize for velocity, moving money from one asset to the next, constantly amplifying your reach. You are no longer a worker trying to earn a living. You are a system architect building a pipeline. You are playing the game the rich have played for centuries, the one they don't teach in schools, because the system needs bucket carriers to keep the village running. But there is one final piece to this puzzle. If you have the ownership, the momentum, and the leverage, you are finally a threat to the status quo. To stay at the top, you have to understand the most controversial core value of all. The system isn't just a game, it's a design. How do the elite ensure that even when the economy crashes, they get richer? What is the final secret to rigging the game that ensures your legacy survives for generations while everyone else is wiped out? It's time to look at the rules through the eyes of the people who actually wrote them.